Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, technical agronomist with Cooperative Farmers Elevator. And on this week's Field Friday segment, kind of wanted to touch on a weather event that kind of knocked some corn down in parts of our territory and kind of showed us a few things about our corn crop. Talk about some of the causes and what to maybe be looking for in your own fields. We had, in parts of Lyon County and northern Sioux County, we had some pretty heavy rain come through earlier this week. Probably where we had the heavier rain, we also had some heavier winds, and we kind of blew down some corn. Some of them blew pretty flat, not very pretty. Pockets here and there, some big chunks of fields and so on, and there were lots of factors. As of today, several days later, obviously, if that corn has not tasseled yet, every node of that corn plant will try and bend back straight so it does not look near as flat as it had. A lot of that corn is going to have a gooseneck on the bottom of that plant. Could create a little bit of harvest difficulty. Hopefully it's not too bad, but it happened far enough ahead of tasseling. We should still be able to tassel and pollinate. It could have some impact on the yield, but it'd be better than if it was this coming week when we're really at tasseling. But I thought we'd talk about a couple of factors that are probably involved in what happened with this corn. First and foremost, we see down corn historically have always said, you know, it's got to be rootworm feeding. And that is a factor in quite a few of these fields the way it seems. If we dig up some roots, we can definitely see some feeding even on the traded corn or even on some of the insecticide treated strips. If you think about the last couple years, we've had really wet soils, saturated soils for big chunks of the year. And when those rootworm larvae want to hatch and become, you know, a feeding population, when they hatch, if that soil is saturated or too wet, there's a lot of mortality to them. So our population is quite a bit lower. This year we had really good hatch conditions for rootworm larvae. When they hatched, it was pretty dry in the soil. Their survivability was very good, and I think we can see the populations are definitely higher this year because of it. We can see that with the feeding on, you know, the situations we talked about. Corn on corn does seem to be worse. Fuller season corn seems to be worse because it hasn't set brace roots yet the way it appears. And fuller season corn tends to be a little taller and tends to be more of a vertical type root system the way it appears. So those were a couple of factors. As we go into these fields, if it's corn on corn for sure, we've been able to find rootworm feeding fairly heavy in some pockets. So that would be something you may want to look at. We had wind and heavy rain to kind of blow some of this corn down. Other parts of our territory, as we get further to the east, we didn't have down corn, but that doesn't mean you didn't have rootworm feeding. It showed up because of the weather we had. You could still have the same amount of rootworm feeding if you have corn on corn. I would consider going out and looking at some of your fields, digging up some roots right now as you get a chance. Bring those back to the yard, wash those root balls off, and see what you see. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out if there's a problem, if there's feeding there, and how bad it is. When you wash those roots off with a nozzle or a power washer or whatever, it's a little bit of a dirty job, but it's worth doing, so that way you know. You can tell white is good, brown is bad. If it's brown, it's scarred, it's probably fed on, or you can tell some roots just aren't even there because they've been completely chewed off. But it's good to know. Just because you don't have down corn doesn't mean you didn't have some feeding going on. And it'll be good to know for future management decisions. Corn on corn obviously is going to be a higher pressure situation. That's where most of our issues have showed up. Another thing that happens a lot of times in corn on corn, where we did have some of this corn blow down, is we had deeper, more aggressive tillage. That a lot of times loosens up the soil so it doesn't anchor quite as well. We talked about fuller season corn being maybe a little bit more of an issue. That factor being it's a little bit later developing. The brace roots maybe weren't set yet, so some of those blew down worse. And of course the genetics have something to do with that too. But it doesn't matter what color your seed bag is. If you've got corn on corn, you've probably had some feeding the way it appears. So it's worth knowing. But that's kind of what, you know, we're seeing some different things this year with different weather patterns we haven't seen for a few years. This is another one. Luckily, we've got some moisture. You know, we've had some rain here the last couple days. There's a little bit more rain forecast, you know, in the next week or so with some things coming through. So that'll help as we, you know, start to regenerate roots and get some of this stuff to grow back. We're coming into that very critical stage. We've got just a few fields with some tassels starting to pop out now. Next week, I think you're going to see a lot of fields starting to throw tassels and silk, so it's going to be really important for that corn plant to be happy. And hopefully we've got an adequate root system to do that. But just wanted to touch on something that we've seen here and something you should maybe be considering looking at your own fields. In general, the corn crop still looks fantastic. You know, we talked about considering a fungicide. I think our crop looks like it has some really good yield potential, especially with these, you know, little rain events we've had come through and add a little bit more moisture to us. It'd be nice if we'd cool down the nighttime temperatures after we start getting to pollination. That would be helpful for yield, but it's worth knowing what's going on out in your field for next year's management, and then also taking a look and seeing how good things probably do still look is to help make management decisions for this year. So I guess with that, just wanted to touch on a few of those topics and make you aware of what's possibly going on so you can take a look. So with that, that's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.